Hi, I'm Amy. They didn't just leave me out of Grandpa's will reading. They made sure I never even knew it happened. No call, no message. Just a closed door I was never meant to reopen. But what if the truth didn't need their permission? What if the land they tried to steal had already been signed over to me, years ago? They rewrote the story. But Grandpa left the receipts. Do you ever wonder how far your own family would go to erase you, and what happens when you come back with the proof? They didn't tell me he was gone. I found out the way strangers do, through the newspaper. Tucked between a used car ad and a photo of the local high school baseball team was the obituary. Silas Vexler, beloved father, grandfather, mentor, passed away peacefully at home. Peacefully. The word rang hollow. No one called me. No one thought to. I booked a one-way ticket to Burlington that night. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask permission. And I didn't expect anyone to be waiting. By the time the cab turned off Main and into my parents' neighborhood, the early spring chill had turned my fingers stiff. The house still looked the same. White siding, navy shutters, perfectly trimmed hedges. Only colder now, like someone had drained the warmth and sealed the windows shut. The porch lights were off. I rang the bell twice before I heard the familiar shuffle of my mother's steps. She opened the door halfway and blinked like she'd seen a ghost. "Amy," she said flatly. No hug. No, "How was your flight?" Just my name, like an afterthought. "I came for Grandpa's memorial." She stepped aside. "Of course, the service is tomorrow." I walked in. The air smelled like furniture polish and stale lavender. They'd redecorated. Gone were the bookshelves lined with Silas's photographs. Gone was his old leather armchair. Instead, sleek glass, sterile corners. Not a single thing that looked like it belonged to someone who once taught me how to spot hawks, just by their shadow. Dad came down the stairs, pausing mid-step. "Didn't expect you," he muttered, tightening the belt on his cardigan. "No one called." He looked at Mom, then back at me. "Thought Delaney would have handled that." I didn't reply. What was there to say? The guest room door creaked as I pushed it open. Still the same flower print wallpaper, same squeaky dresser, but no photos. Not one. Not even the picture of me and Grandpa on the dock the summer I turned 12, the one he used to keep next to the lamp. I unpacked in silence and tried to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early, dressed in black slacks and a navy blouse, tied my hair back in a low bun, and drove myself to the memorial. The community hall was packed. Silas had meant something to this town. I stood at the entrance for a few seconds, letting my eyes adjust to the fluorescent lighting. People glanced my way, some offering tight-lipped smiles, others avoiding my gaze entirely. Delaney spotted me. She was near the front, talking with the mayor's wife. Her dress was a soft gray, her posture perfect. She waved, half-heartedly, and returned to her conversation. Not once did she come over. A woman at the table by the door handed me a printed program. "Here you go. Oh." She checked the list. "Sorry, seating's mostly arranged. There's space in the back row." I followed her pointed finger to a folding chair near the restrooms, next to a mop bucket and a tray of cold coffee. I sat down. The chair wobbled on uneven tiles. When the slideshow began, I watched frame after frame of Silas's life. Him holding Delaney as a baby, teaching her to ride a bike, giving a speech at her graduation. Not once did my face appear. Not once did my name pass the lips of anyone who stood at that podium. Even the eulogy painted a picture I couldn't recognize. "He adored his family," one man said, "especially his daughter Corinne, his brilliant son-in-law Eldrick, and his devoted granddaughter Delaney." I was invisible. On purpose. During the reception, I tried to keep to myself, hovering near the coffee table, sipping burnt brew from a paper cup. An older woman approached me, someone who used to work with Grandpa at the university. "I remember you," she said with a gentle smile. "Amy, right? You used to paint birds." I nodded. "He spoke about you," she added, then leaned closer. "Not recently, but he used to." I thanked her politely. What else could I do? Ask her why he stopped, why they all did. Just as I was grabbing my coat to leave, I passed by the coat room and heard voices, hushed, fast. She wasn't on the list, Delaney was saying. We made sure of that. I told you it would come back to bite us, my mother whispered. We should have said something. Delaney snapped. She left. She cut herself off. She doesn't get to waltz in now and play the grieving granddaughter. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. They made sure of it. They made sure I would be a ghost at my own grandfather's goodbye. Then I guess it's time I remember for both of us, I said, turning to Norma with steady eyes. She didn't answer. She just gave the faintest nod, like she'd been waiting for me to stop surviving and start acting. The next morning, a soft fog hung low over the town, the kind that clings to windows and makes everything feel quieter than it is. I walked to the gallery early, before the parking lot filled up, before the whispers started circling again. The town was holding a public exhibit in Silas's memory. My mother's idea, of course. Legacy through art, the posters said. My mother, ever the strategist, had coordinated the entire event with the local arts council, down to the ribbon color on the brochure table. She knew how to dress grief up in silk and call it reverence. Inside the gallery, the space was dim but curated. Spotlights fell softly on enlarged photographs, arranged in a timeline. Silas as a boy in suspenders, Silas at his wedding to my grandmother, Silas receiving an honorary degree. Each section was labeled with a small brass plaque. Teacher, husband, visionary, father. I walked slowly, taking it all in, and then I got to the final wall. The last panel was titled, His Greatest Pride. It was a family collage. Smiling faces, holiday dinners, graduation hugs. Delaney appeared 7 times. My mother and father at least 5. There were even 2 photos of Silas holding my cousin's newborn. But nowhere was I. A high school friend I hadn't seen in years came up behind me, holding a tiny plate of cheese cubes. I thought you moved away, she said, half chewing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That wall had already spoken for me. I kept my hands folded tightly in front of me as I moved to the reception table. Every conversation I passed was a variation of the same theme. Grief packaged neatly, respect performed like theater. My parents moved through the crowd like seasoned diplomats. Corinne laughed a little too perfectly. Eldrick gripped shoulders, making strong eye contact with men who mattered in town. During the closing remarks, my uncle Nathan, Dad's older brother, was invited to say a few words. He stepped up to the podium with a mix of grief and smugness. Silas was a man who understood loyalty, he said, eyes sweeping the room. Some of us stayed by his side till the very end. He knew who truly cared. He didn't have to look directly at me. The silence that followed did all the pointing for him. My father, seated in the front row, gave a satisfied nod. Delaney leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and they both smiled like co-conspirators in a small, clean crime. I smiled too. Not because I felt it, but because I wouldn't let them be the only ones performing. After the speech, I tried to speak with Royce Trenton, Silas's lawyer. He was standing by the punch bowl, half listening to my mother talk about tax-deductible donations. I waited until there was a pause, then took a step forward. Royce, could I ask? But before I could finish, my mother looped her arm through his and said, Oh, Royce, there's someone I want you to meet. Just a moment, Amy. She didn't even glance at me. He was gone in 3 steps. I didn't try again. What was the point? As I turned to leave, Delaney brushed past me, her voice low. You left a long time ago, Amy. You can't just walk back into the middle like nothing happened. She didn't wait for a response, but something inside me shifted then. Not just anger, but understanding. This wasn't oversight, it was architecture. They weren't just leaving me out. They were building a version of our family without me in it. I stayed behind as the gallery began to empty. The cleaning staff started stacking cups and folding linen napkins. I wandered toward the back hallway, toward the old student showcase wall, where, once, Silas had hung up one of my watercolor paintings of lakebirds. It was gone. In its place was a framed print of Delaney standing next to the mayor, receiving some kind of Young Civic Leader award. The frame was gilded, her smile triumphant. My breath caught, not in sadness, but in clarity. I'd spent so long wondering if I had exaggerated the distance, if I'd imagined being forgotten. I hadn't. They'd made it real, framed it, and hung it on the wall. I didn't notice Norma until she was standing next to me, a paper plate of uneaten cookies in her hand. "Not everything was meant to be erased," she said softly. "But they're trying." I turned to her slowly. She looked older than I remembered, smaller, like time had carved pieces from her, but left the spine intact. "They can try," I said, "but I still remember, and I think it's time I remember for both of us." She didn't nod, didn't smile. She just touched my elbow gently and left her cookies on the table before walking out into the fog. I stood in front of that wall one more time, not crying, not hurt, just resolved. If they wanted to rewrite history, they were going to have to burn a few chapters, because I hadn't forgotten. And now, I wasn't going to stay quiet about it either. The document sleeve was dusty, but untouched. In his handwriting, "For Amy," before anyone else. I sat back on my heels, still crouched beside the loose floorboard in the corner of the cabin. There was no ceremony to the moment, no spotlight or music or chorus of apology. Just my name written in that familiar, slanted script I hadn't seen since the last birthday card he ever sent me. I pulled the envelope from the compartment carefully, as though it might disintegrate in my hands if I moved too quickly. It didn't. It was solid. Real. Which is more than I could say for anything else I'd been offered from my family lately. The cabin creaked in the wind outside. The sky had gone from overcast to deep gray while I'd been inside. A storm was probably moving in, but I didn't care. I stayed. There was a folded letter inside the envelope. No wax seal, no legal stamp, just 3 sheets of thick paper and the smell of old ink. And beneath the letter, flattened, neatly folded, encased in a plastic sleeve, was a property deed. My name typed clearly on the line next to grantee. The signature date was nearly 2 years earlier. Witnessed. Filed. No one else's name was on it. Just mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat on the floor, both knees tucked beneath me, reading the words of the only person who had ever looked at me and seen more than a disappointment or a problem to solve. "I know this isn't the way you should receive this. You should be hearing it from me, looking me in the eye. But if you're reading this, it means they found a way to cut you out. Again. And I failed to stop it in time. This land, the cabin, the water, the trees, isn't just property. It's breath. It's memory. It's the only place that ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere beyond a job title or a last name. And it was only ever supposed to be yours. Because you understood that. You saw it." I folded the letter back slowly and slid everything into my bag. By the time I stepped out onto the porch, the rain had started. Light, steady. I didn't bother running to the car. The walk back through the woods was quiet. I let the water soak into my shirt, my shoes, my hair. Let it rinse something off me. The bitterness, maybe, or at least the layer of numbness that had made me think I didn't care anymore. That night, after a hot shower and a dry sweater, I made myself tea and sat at the edge of my old twin bed, scrolling through the digital county records on my laptop. I typed in the parcel number from the deed, and sure enough, the document had been filed. Legally binding, verified. The only transfer I saw afterward was a pending correction submitted months later by someone named E. Malroe. I didn't need a family tree to know who that was. I shut the laptop and stared at the wall across from me. This was no longer about a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, a transaction, an erasure by design. The next morning, Norma called. "I have something else," she said. "You'll want to see it before they do." She met me outside the back kitchen door. Same apron, same calm voice, She handed me a small square metal tin with her initials etched on the lid. "He gave me this a while ago. Said to hold on to it for you. Only you." Inside was a silver key and another folded note. This one shorter, scrawled in what looked like a hurry. "Cabin, south wall, third beam. You'll know it." I left before breakfast. Didn't wait to be noticed. Drove out of the neighborhood, through the edge of town, and back to the cabin like I had every right in the world to be there. Because I did. It took some time to find the exact spot. I had to move a shelf that had grown roots into the floor, but eventually I found it. One beam out of place, a groove carved beneath. I slid the key into the hidden lock, twisted gently, and heard the soft click that told me something had just given way. Beneath a panel, tucked into a hidden box no larger than a shoebox, was a second folder. Inside, copies. Silas's copy of the same deed. Bank statements. A list of improvements he'd paid for himself. Receipts with his signature. Everything documented. Everything timed before his health had started failing. There was even a typed letter to his attorney, Royce, requesting confirmation that the transfer had gone through without objection. And yet here I was, sitting on a cabin floor, with more evidence in a secret box than had ever been shared with me openly. Later that evening, the sky finally cleared. The lake shimmered in the fading light. I stood on the porch with the deed in one hand and the letter in the other. A part of me wanted to drive straight to my parents' house, slap it all on their dinner table, and ask them what kind of people turn legacy into leverage. But instead, I stayed. I stayed because it wasn't about them anymore. Not really. It was about the promise that had been made in quiet moments between me and my grandfather, in walks by the lake, in early morning coffee on this very porch. Those things weren't loud. They weren't official. But they were real. And now, I had proof. Not for them. For me. They'd written me out. But he had written me in, first. The screen showed 0003 seconds. Corinne hadn't noticed. But I had heard just enough. I didn't press stop. I didn't need to. Whatever she handed that courthouse clerk in the thick manila envelope, whatever paper trail she thought she could quietly redirect, it was too late. My hand trembled a little, not from fear, but from something colder, sharper. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and walked across the parking lot like I was on my way to buy milk. Inside the car, I sat for a minute. The heat hummed against my face, drying the sweat I hadn't realized was forming at the back of my neck. I stared out the windshield at the courthouse doors as they slowly closed behind her. She didn't look back. I drove back to the cabin. The road curled with memory. Every curve felt like a question he had once asked me. What would you do if they took the land from you? At the time, I laughed. You're being dramatic, I told him. But he wasn't. He knew them better than I did. Back at the cabin, I spread the documents across the table. Deeds, receipts, the letter. Silas's signature in that unmistakable left-leaning cursive. Then, I opened my laptop and started digging. County records, transfer history, transaction timelines. At first glance, the land had transferred to me 2 years ago, just like Silas said. The scan he kept matched the digital copy filed with the office. But something caught my eye. A line marked pending reassignment, flagged just 5 months ago. The initiating name? Eldrick Malraux? I leaned back, blinked hard. There it was. No wonder Royce had been ducking me at the gallery. If my father had tried to reverse the title using his connections and Silas's failing health as a shield, then the will reading tomorrow wasn't about wishes. It was about strategy. They weren't just writing me out. They were laundering the past. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Around 3:40 a.m., I started making copies. Multiple folders, flash drives. I highlighted every date, every witness signature. I didn't want revenge. I wanted backup, a paper army. Let them say I was emotional, dramatic, ungrateful. Let them try. By sunrise, I'd packed 2 manila envelopes, one for Royce and one for me. I grabbed a jacket, keys, and coffee from the gas station near the lake. On a hunch, I made a detour, just a few blocks off Route 7, where Mrs. Leda Marlin lived alone in a blue clapboard house with a front porch that always smelled faintly of lemon polish. She was in the garden, pruning a line of roses already in bloom despite the cold. "Leda," I said gently from the gate, "do you have a moment?" She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I was wondering when you'd come by." We sat on the porch with mugs of weak coffee and a plate of cinnamon toast. She offered me the good chair, the one with the cushion, and said nothing until I did. "I just need to know," I said. "Did he talk about the cabin?" She nodded once, eyes focused on her hands. "More than once. He said it was yours. Said you were the only one who didn't look at the lake like a dollar sign." I stared down at the rim of my mug. "He said they'd fight you for it," she added, her voice low. He knew it was coming. The silence sat between us like another person. Before I left, Leda put her hand over mine. "They may own the narrative, Amy, but not the truth." I drove away slower than I should have, not because I was uncertain, but because I wasn't. My father could doctor documents. My mother could hold gallery exhibits and eulogize the version of him that fit her mold. But they couldn't unplant the seed he left in this town. And they sure as hell couldn't make me walk away this time. As I turned the corner toward town, I caught sight of a silver car parked outside the county office. Corinne again. Too early for errands. Too late to be casual. I slowed, parked across the street. From where I stood, I watched her hand the same envelope I saw yesterday to the front desk clerk. She was calm, confident. I took out my phone again and hit record. She didn't see me until she turned, and by then it didn't matter. Our eyes met briefly through the glass. She blinked, then smiled. Small, rehearsed, managerial. The same expression she used when she denied things that were clearly true. Later that afternoon, I reviewed the footage and emailed a copy to myself. I didn't plan to go viral. I just needed a record, something to hold next to the deeds, next to the letter, next to the version of reality they were trying to forge in silence. That night, I went back to the cabin one more time before the will reading. I lit a fire, more for comfort than warmth. I sat on the couch, wrapped in Silas's old flannel blanket, the one with the stitched initials at the corner, and watched the flames move like memory across wood. I wasn't scared of tomorrow. I wasn't waiting for anyone to acknowledge me anymore. I had what mattered, and I was done pretending their version of the story was the only one that counted. Her phone stayed silent, but for the first time, I slept with my legal folder by the bed. I didn't expect her to reply, and she didn't disappoint me. In fact, that silence felt almost louder than any lie she could have sent back. It was a confirmation. Not of guilt, they'd never admit that, but of strategy. They were watching, waiting, hoping I'd blink first. I didn't. By 9 a.m., I was at the Burlington County Records Office, standing in line behind a man arguing about a property line dispute. The clerk, a thin man with coffee-stained teeth and a name badge that read Doug, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When it was finally my turn, I leaned forward and spoke clearly. "I'm here to request a printout of all recorded property transfers involving Silas Vexler in the past 3 years. Specifically, anything regarding Parcel 18B. Doug glanced at me, then down at his screen. "You, the executor?" "No," I said. "I'm the grantee on a prior deed. I have documentation. Would you like to see it?" He hesitated, then nodded. I pulled the folder from my tote bag and laid the notarized deed down gently. No flair, just facts. His fingers tapped across the keyboard. After a moment, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Well?" he muttered, squinting at the screen. "That's interesting." He clicked a few more tabs, then turned the monitor slightly toward me. "There's a file here showing a transfer of Parcel 18B, dated 6 months before Mr. Vexler passed. Grantee listed as Delaney Malroe, notarized by Samuel Crowley." Crowley. That name lit up something in my brain. A financial advisor who'd worked with my father for decades. Also the same man who attended the memorial, but didn't look me in the eye once. Doug printed the record and handed it over. Looks like it was filed in person, paper copy, not e-filed. I scanned the form quickly. The signature, Silas's, was uneven, slanted, not the same firm hand from the documents I had. And the date? 2 days after he was admitted to the hospital for pneumonia. I looked back up. Can I request a certified copy of this, with timestamp metadata? Doug shrugged. Sure, might take a day. I nodded. I'll wait. Back at my room, still technically a rental above the old bakery, I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, the fake deed and my real one side by side. The forged one was messy. Different font, different formatting. Subtle, but if you knew what to look for, it screamed rushed. I tried to log into my email archive, wanting to pull the last few messages from Royce, Silas's attorney. Nothing was there. I checked my spam folder. Nothing. Junk? Empty. Then I checked my account settings. Forwarding had been enabled to an address I didn't recognize. malro.familydeskEdgemail.com. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. That wasn't a family email. That was a burner. A trapdoor built into my own account, set up just weeks after Silas died. I hadn't noticed it. I didn't think to. Until now. I disabled the forward, changed my password, and sat still for a full minute. Then I called Royce's office. Hi, this is Amy Vexler. I'm just confirming. Did you send emails about the will proceedings earlier this year? His assistant, a kind voice named Molly, said, We did. 3, I believe. December, January, and February. But each one bounced back. We thought maybe you'd changed your contact info. No, I didn't. I paused. Can you resend them now? Of course. Within seconds, the messages arrived. All professional, all factual, and all damning in their absence these past few months. I sat back, the folder resting on my knees, the weight of the morning pressing into my ribs. This wasn't just personal, it wasn't just emotional, it was tactical, and they'd bet on me being too slow, too quiet, too removed to catch up. They were wrong. I took a photo of the original deed and attached it in a text message to Delaney. You might want to get ahead of this before Mom and Dad dig the hole deeper. Message read. No reply. I waited 10 minutes. Then 20. Nothing. So I stopped waiting. That evening, with the sky turning the color of steel wool, I sat at the little dining table by the window and wrote one sentence. No preamble, no plea. I opened my messages, typed in my mother's number, and pressed send. If you force me to speak publicly, I will. And I'll bring paperwork. I didn't expect a response. And I didn't get one. But I slept. For the first time in weeks, I laid down with the folder beside me and closed my eyes without rehearsing comebacks or imagining their faces when I'd walk into that reading. Tomorrow was no longer something I feared. It was something I was walking toward, with proof in hand. The phone vibrated once. Royce's reply was short. Understood. 2 p.m. sharp. I stared at the message for a moment longer than I needed to, not because I doubted his word, but because I knew this meant the final curtain was about to rise. No more sidelines. No more whispers behind my back. Tomorrow, I'd be in that room, and I wouldn't be there to listen. That afternoon, I walked into Maplebank carrying the original deed in a protective sleeve and a printout of the county's time-stamped transfer record. I wore black slacks, a slate blouse, and no makeup. Just facts. That's all I needed now. The bank lobby was nearly empty. A woman in scrubs stood at the counter discussing overdraft charges, while a man behind her flipped through deposit slips impatiently. When it was my turn, the teller directed me to the back office. Mr. Rowland will assist you, she said with a tight smile, like she already knew what was coming. Rowland, mid-50s, balding, impeccably dressed, looked up from his monitor as I stepped in. How can I help you today? I'm here to access a safety deposit box under the name Silas Vexler, I said, handing him the slip and the deed. Box 2111. My grandfather told me it was jointly authorized. He glanced at the paper, then at his screen. His expression shifted subtly. Not alarm, but something close to inconvenience. I see the box, he said. But according to this, your name was removed from authorized access last month. The current authorized users are Eldrick Malraux and Delaney Malraux. I paused. Excuse me? I understand this might be unexpected, he said, using the kind of tone someone would use to explain a weather delay or a restaurant closing early. But an updated authorization form was submitted, notarized, and filed internally, without your name. Who filed it? He clicked. Mr. Malraux, signed and verified by our notary. Of course it was. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I opened my bag, took out my notebook, and wrote down the time, Roland's name, the box number, and the date he claimed the update was made. If this ends up in litigation, I said calmly, I'll need documentation that I was denied access despite prior authorization and current legal ownership. Roland cleared his throat. I can print a log of access history if that helps. Please do. On my way out, the sun was just beginning to dip. The light on Main Street stretched long and gold through the windows of the coffee shop across the street. I reached my car, opened the door, and the screen lit up. Incoming call, Mom. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Amy, she said, her voice measured. What exactly do you think you're doing? You already know. There was a pause. We've been through so much. Why stir this all up now? Your father, he's not here to... I cut her off. Exactly, he's not. And maybe that's the only reason this is happening now. Another pause. She inhaled through her nose, sharp, clipped. You think you understand everything, but you don't. You always see betrayal in places where there's just reality. No, I said. I see betrayal because you signed off on it. I hung up before she could respond. Later that evening, I parked a block from the house. The lights were off in most windows except the study, which used to be Silas's. It had once smelled like cedar and old books. The shelves had been lined with maps, journals, pressed wildflowers he kept between pages. Now it was storage. Last I heard, Corinne planned to knock down the back wall and turn it into an extension of the kitchen. I didn't use the front door. I walked around the side, past the hydrangeas Silas had planted for my grandmother, and tried the side entrance. Still the same rusted key. Inside, everything looked unfamiliar. The furniture was different. The artwork was generic, abstract cityscapes in brushed steel frames. I moved carefully, every step deliberate. In the old study, I scanned the room. The wall where Silas had hung my first watercolor was bare, but the painting he'd given me, his own lake scene, signed in the bottom right, was still there, leaned against the wall, collecting dust. I lifted the frame, turned it around, and found what I was looking for. Etched along the inner stretcher bar, in small but deliberate handwriting, to the one who sees the lake as shelter, not sail. This is yours. My throat tightened, not with grief, but with clarity. Behind the canvas, a folded envelope had been taped flat. I peeled it away and slipped it into my coat. Back in the car, under the dome light, I opened it. Inside, a duplicate copy of the original deed. Another notarized letter, this one signed by Silas's attorney, dated a full year before his hospitalization. A confirmation that the land had already changed hands, legally, permanently. And a single line at the bottom, handwritten by Silas. For Amy, no edits, no negotiations. I drove back to the cabin. On the porch, I lit the fireplace again. Not because I was cold, but because something about flames made truth feel cleaner. I laid out the documents on the table, organized them in the same order I'd use tomorrow if I had to hand them to Royce. Then I took a photo of the etched message behind the painting, and then I opened my phone, typed one message. I'll be attending the will reading. I suggest you bring the original will, not the redacted one. Sent to Royce. The reply came fast. Understood. 2 p.m. sharp. Delaney looked at the empty chair where Silas would have sat. He really planned all of this. I didn't answer her. Not because I didn't have words, but because for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. The truth was already speaking for me, louder than I ever could. The next day arrived gray and still, the kind of weather that made the town feel like it had its own held breath. I dressed without music, without ceremony, just clean lines and firm steps. Dark trousers, pressed, blouse buttoned to the collar. No jewelry, no perfume. I wanted to smell like reality. I parked 2 blocks from the law office. I didn't want them seeing me walk in like I was storming anything. I wanted to be still, certain. A stone in the river they couldn't reroute. The receptionist glanced up when I entered. She looked like she recognized me, but didn't know from where. Royce stepped into the lobby before she could ask, his face tight with something between discomfort and expectation. "Amy," he said, voice low, "they're already inside." Of course they were. I followed him down the hallway, each step echoing just enough to feel like a countdown. The room itself was warm, too warm, like they'd cranked the heat just enough to make you uncomfortable, but not enough to justify asking for it to be turned down. Eldrick, Corinne, and Delaney sat in a row along one side of the polished table. Royce gestured to the chair directly across from them, a place I'm sure they hoped would remain empty. I sat without looking at any of them. My folder landed on the table with a soft thud. Royce cleared his throat. "Well," he began, "thank you all for being here today. As you know, we're gathered for the formal reading of Silas Vexler's last will and testament, dated March of last year." Corinne crossed her legs, smoothing the hem of her skirt. Eldrick adjusted his watch. Delaney stared at her hands. Royce continued, "The will states the following. The family home is to be transferred to Corinne Vexler. Remaining business shares and liquid assets are to be divided evenly between Corinne and Eldrick Malraux. Personal effects, including heirlooms and journals, are to be given to Delaney Malraux." He paused, then glanced at me. "There is also a supplemental instruction," he said, reaching into his briefcase. "A video message recorded by Mr. Vexler. He requested it be played only if Amy Vexler is present." Corinne shifted in her chair. "Royce, I wasn't made aware of any—" Royce raised a hand. "It was filed separately, under a sealed clause. I received notice this morning to proceed." He placed a small tablet on the table and pressed play. The screen lit up. Silas appeared, sitting in his favorite porch chair at the cabin. He looked thinner than I remembered, but not frail, sharp as ever, voice clear. "If Amy is in the room, then she found the truth," he began. "If she isn't, then I failed to protect her." Eldrick exhaled loudly. Corinne shot him a look that said, "Don't start now." Silas continued. "The cabin, parcel 18B, was transferred to Amy 2 years ago. Because she asked for nothing. Because she understood what it meant to belong to something without owning it. Because she saw the land, not the value." He paused, as if searching for a word only I would understand. This decision was made in full sound mind. It was notarized, filed, and acknowledged by the county recorder's office. There is no ambiguity. There is no amendment. Royce clicked to pause the video. "That transfer stands. It is separate from the will and was enacted during Mr. Vexler's lifetime." The room fell quiet. Eldrick stood up abruptly, hand slapping the table. "She manipulated him in his final months. She wasn't even there." I didn't flinch. "You were the one who kept me away," I said evenly. "You changed my contact info, blocked my emails, rewrote access to the bank account. And you want to talk about manipulation?" Corinne's voice came out tight. "We built that life with him. We were there through every hospital visit, every prescription, every—" "You built a house," I said calmly. "He built a legacy. There's a difference." Delaney said nothing, just stared at the video still frozen on the screen. Silas's eyes locked somewhere past the lens, like he saw us all sitting here already. Royce stood. That concludes the formal reading. Copies of the will and accompanying documentation will be emailed to all parties. No one moved. Eventually, Eldrick stormed out without a word. Corinne followed, clutching her bag like it might break open and spill her pride across the carpet. Only Delaney remained. She looked at me for the first time in weeks. "You're going to make this public, aren't you?" she asked, voice not angry, just tired. I gathered my folder, closed the flap slowly. "I don't need to," I said, walking toward the door. He already did. The lies had stopped, but the silence inside me would take longer to fix. I left the law office through the side exit, not because I was avoiding attention, but because I didn't want to waste the calm I'd fought so hard to earn. The sky had turned the color of pewter, and a cool wind chased leaves down the sidewalk like they were trying to outrun the past. I kept walking until the courthouse faded behind me, and the only sound was my own shoes scuffing against the pavement. 15 minutes later, I found myself standing in front of his grave. There were fresh lilies resting at the base of the headstone, deliberate, arranged, which meant Norma had been here. I didn't need to ask. I knelt, brushing my fingertips across the engraving. Silas Vexler, father, teacher, grandfather, no mention of legacy, no mention of land. But he wouldn't have wanted that. Titles had never impressed him. Something small caught my eye, a patch of loose soil near the stone's edge, like it had been disturbed and gently patted down again. I dug with my fingers, carefully, the way you would open a memory that might still sting. My nails hit metal. A small tin box. Plain. Scratched along the edge. I pried it open. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in that familiar slanted hand. The script looked shakier than it once was, but it was still his. I sat down fully, knees in the grass, and opened it right there, under the tree we used to picnic beneath every spring when I was little. The letter was brief. 3 sentences. That's all it needed. "They tried to rewrite you out. I never let them, and I never will. Tell the truth only if you need to, but never let anyone say you weren't mine." I didn't cry. I folded the paper back into its envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket like it was made of glass. It wasn't about exposing them anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. That night, back at the cabin, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something odd about the old flip phone Norma had slipped into my tote bag after the will reading. I thought it was just nostalgia, a relic from Silas's drawer. But as I plugged it in, the screen lit up. 1 voice memo. No label. Just a timestamp. 8 months ago. I hit play. The static came first, then a shuffle. Then his voice. Quieter than usual, but steady. "No, that's not what I want," he said. "It's not. To Delaney. The land, it's for Amy." Then came another voice. Muffled, male, familiar. "Silas, we just want what's best. You're not thinking clearly. Let us take care of this." Silas again, firmer this time. "Don't put her name on it. She doesn't see it. She doesn't love it. Amy does." The file ended there. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because there was finally no space left for doubt. The next morning, I walked into the office of the town attorney, not Royce, a different man. Clean desk, no family photos, a nameplate that didn't carry my parents' fingerprints. He greeted me neutrally. I didn't need warmth. I needed accuracy. "I'm not here to sue anyone," I told him. "I just want the record to reflect what actually happened." He nodded. I placed the contents on the desk in slow, deliberate order. The original deed, the letter from Silas, the voice recording, the notarized letter from the painting, a printed screenshot of the video clip from the will reading "He took his time." Reviewed each one like a teacher grading the final paper of a student he wasn't sure about yet. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. "This will require a formal review, but this is more than enough to file for a correction. That's all I'm asking for. Do you want to notify the parties involved?" I shook my head. "They already know." As I walked out of the building, the wind had picked up. Not cold, just alive. Outside City Hall, a clerk was pinning a legal notice to the bulletin board. I paused just long enough to read it. Land ownership correction. Parcel 18B, reinstated to Amy Vexler. No headlines, no microphone, just a piece of paper in a plastic sleeve, fluttering in the wind. A local reporter I vaguely recognized from high school came out of the building just as I turned to leave. He did a double take, then smiled awkwardly. "Hey, you're—" But I kept walking. I didn't need to tell it, he already had. And in that silence, I understood. Justice doesn't always heal, but it makes space for healing to begin. 2 weeks passed, enough time for the town to do what towns always do, take sides quietly. You'd never hear it said outright, but the shift was clear. Neighbors who used to wave at my parents across the street now found reasons to keep their heads down, to pull into the driveway a little quicker. The grocery store cashier, who once laughed too loudly at Dad's jokes, handed Corinne her change without a word. There were no confrontations, no front-page exposés, just absence, the polite kind that lingers long after you've left the room. I didn't take satisfaction in it. That would have meant I was still fighting them. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I started walking into town more, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to take up space again, in my own name. One afternoon, I stepped into Bernard's bakery. He barely looked up from behind the counter, but as he boxed up a croissant, he said softly, "About time someone spoke up." I didn't respond. I just gave him a nod. It was enough. A few days later, Norma called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't have to. She simply said, "Your mother left a message, said you could stop by if you wanted to collect anything from the house." I hesitated, then said, "Okay." The drive there was shorter than I remembered. Familiar roads, same old turns, but they felt hollow, like walking through a theater set after the actors had gone home. I parked in front of the house and didn't bother knocking. Norma opened the door before I reached it. "She's not here," she said. "Eldrick's out of town. Delaney's upstairs, I think." The inside looked the same, but colder. Not in temperature, just in spirit. I walked through the rooms with careful steps. They hadn't changed much, but the absence of Silas was louder now than it had ever been when he was alive. I took only what mattered. A faded photo of the two of us from the summer I turned 15. Me in paint-stained overalls, him laughing with his eyes closed. A scarf he bought for me when I got into art school, and one painting I'd done of the cabin porch, which he'd framed without telling me. I didn't go upstairs. Delaney didn't come down. As I was leaving, Norma handed me a paper bag. Inside was a thermos of tea and a wrapped sandwich. "You used to forget to eat when you were angry," she said. "I still do." She smiled, but her eyes didn't. Back at the cabin, I placed the photo on the bookshelf where Silas had kept his bird guides. I unfolded the scarf and laid it across the chair he always sat in. Then I looked around the room, not as it was, but as I wanted it to be. The next day, I hung a small wooden sign on the front gate. The Vexler House. No press, no announcement, just the name that had been erased from too many corners, finally carved into one that would last. Below it, a plaque. In memory of a man who knew the land wasn't just land. It was memory. I started rebuilding his study, restoring the shelves, dusting off the old filing cabinets, rehanging the maps he used to trace rivers with his finger. It wasn't about preserving the past exactly. It was about honoring what it meant. A week later, the local radio station called. A producer had heard about the correction at City Hall and asked if I'd come in to talk about it. Not as a scandal, but as a story of family, memory, and what it means to belong. I said yes. Sitting in that tiny booth with headphones pressing into my ears, I spoke softly into the mic. "It wasn't about winning something back," I said. "It was about not letting it be stolen silently." The host asked if I'd heard from my parents since. I paused. Some people confuse silence with peace, I said. I just learned to stop shouting into a wall. The station received letters for days, most from strangers. A few from people I'd forgotten I knew. One woman wrote, "I was erased too, just not on paper." It stayed with me. Late one afternoon, Norma joined me on the porch. She brought lemonade and sat without saying a word for almost 10 minutes. We watched the wind chase ripples across the lake. Finally, she asked, "Would you ever go back?" I turned my head toward her, smiled a little. "No," I said, "but I kept what mattered." And that was enough.